This is Jan English Luig, and this short mini lecture is to help you understand the nature of the anthropological imagination. Some of you will have taken courses in anthropology for general education or as part of your major or a minor, but it's an important perspective to have during our class. As you'll hear in our main interactions on Zoom, we're doing a very in situ applied anthropology project in Japantown, particularly with Japantown Prepared. So I want to give you that perspective of how do anthropologists approach solving practical problems in the world. And we do so with a very holistic perspective. We look at the entire human experience, past, present, and future. And we also think about ourselves as biological entities with needs, as well as cultural entities that reshape the world in our imaginations. Anthropology is one among many other sister social sciences, all trying to understand the human experience. Anthropology's approach is a little bit different. We want to understand people in their natural environments, not in an experimental situation or in an artificial survey, but in one in which we understand how people live their everyday lives and create meaning in their own particular cultural ways. And we began this project as Europeans began to expand it to other parts of the world and found themselves asking, well, what makes people different? Why are they different? How are they different? And how does that difference define the person asking those questions? So in the beginning, anthropology was a very colonial experiment. But over time, that began to change as anthropologists began to encounter people, live with them, experience their lives, and develop empathy. Anthropologists, since we interact with people in their everyday lives, have developed empathy through three particular skills. We listen to people, we watch people, and we live with people and try and experience their cultural environment, their cultural milieu. And by doing that, we begin to understand how people create meaning, how people create relationships, and how they create a physical environment around them. Listening is one of the most powerful skills we have as anthropologists and as social scientists. And so thinking about the power of language is particularly powerful. How do people think? We want to ask ourselves, where are the languages? How many languages are spoken in any particular area? Are those languages, do they differ in the space of, say, a city? Do you know where Vietnamese is spoken? Do you know where Spanish is spoken? Do you know where Japanese is spoken? And how have the ways people express themselves changed through time? And how do they use language? Do they drop in words from different languages? Do they think about things differently if they talk about gaman or if they talk about perseverance? An example that will come up later when you view the tour of Japantown. And of course, how do people preserve and hang on to their identities by hanging on to their languages? Anthropology is one of the behavioral sciences. We want to understand what people do in order to make meaning in their everyday lives. And so we're often very concerned, again, not with experimental or laboratory conditions, as much as everyday life and trying to understand how people live in everyday life. And one of the ways we do that is by immersing ourselves in their cultural environments and learning to experience firsthand how people live. And that powerful tool is called participant observation. And while anthropology may have begun as a very colonial discipline that was a tool to serve those who were in power, it has significantly changed in the last century. And one of the ways it's changed is by understanding that the things that anthropologists study are not limited to the exotic and the foreign, but are part of the everyday life of all human beings, no matter where they are. And one of the special ways we have applied our anthropology is by understanding the range of cultural diversity in modern, global, and urban cities. And so understanding the diversity, the deep, deep diversity that exists within our societies diversity that is real, diversity that is complex, diversity that's hard to call. It's hard to just walk up to someone and identify them as part of a particular generation or culture. Folks are really complex in the 21st century urban environment. And so that particular world is the one that now concerns anthropology. We still struggle with some failed explanations that came from 100 years ago. And the most powerful and one of the most dangerous explanations that occurred was the idea that we are different based on our race. And the concept of race is a very complex one. It's one that we invented about 500 years ago to help justify colonial expansion and the application of slavery and the subjugation of colonial peoples. And it was based on the idea that you could tell what people were, their value as human beings, based on their physical appearance, hair, skin, eyes. And they took these relatively superficial biological attributes and associated them with superiority and inferiority. In part, this happened because people did not understand where behavior came from. And they thought it came from some sort of innate, superficial biological difference instead of a very complex set of interactions between inheritance, environment, and structural inequality. And they use this as a justification for reshaping the world. And we've come to understand this as one of the most dangerous thought pandemics that occurred in the 18th, 19th, and 20th and 21st centuries. And it's one that we've got to be very careful of when we interact in the modern global city, because race is still with us in a powerful way, but it's also fake news. It's misleading that those racial differences are creations of a rather malignant political system that was designed to suppress people. And we've constantly got to be aware of that. So we want to divert our attention away from the misleading explanation of race towards the behaviors and the activities and the actions that people engage in every day. And language is a great example of how we can do that. And to understand that language has a purpose. Language is a marker of identity. It helps you identify with a particular group that speaks the way you do, that thinks the way you do. But it's also a marker of power. And I want you to look at this sign and just answer the question, based on this sign, what language is the most powerful political actor here? And if you don't answer English, I will be astonished, because what's the biggest language on this sign? And yet at the same time, there are many other languages represented here, which also is an indication of a kind of political, cultural environment that acknowledges and respects these other language groups. So I want us to get used to the idea of looking for the traces, the markers of all the different cultures around us. What are their behaviors? What are their artifacts? What are their interactions? And I want us to get away from thinking about culture as something that you are, instead thinking about culture as something that you do. Yes, it is true that culture does affect our identity. It is something that we use to help organize. I speak this language. I dress this way. I laugh at these jokes. I like this music. But all of those behaviors are things that you do. And one of the interesting things in the 21st century global city is that you may toy with behaviors that are part of other people's cultures and you make them your own. And so culture, if it is something that we do, then becomes part of collections of interacting human beings. Some of those collections are at a global scale. If you go to an airport, that is a global piece of culture. It's going to be very similar in Beijing and in San Francisco. At the same time, being North American, being Californian, being part of the Bay Area, being part of Morgan Hill, being part of a particular family, all of those have distinct cultural patterns of behavior and identity. And I want us to get used to thinking about that because we'll be looking at what is the distinctive pattern of behavior associated with Japantown. And let me ask you to just engage in a little bit of a thought experiment. You look at this photograph, which is a photograph of a Japanese family in Japan and everything that they would eat in one day distributed in front of them. They've got a TV commercial in the background. The family is all together showing the combination of fresh foods and packaged snacks that they eat every day. And I want you to think, what do you see there that is cultural? What is a snack? What is a meal? What is pre-prepared? What is fresh? Do you value fresh? Do you value sweet? Do you value savory or bitter? Are you primarily vegetarian? Do you belong to a capitalist consumer system where you really like to buy your food? All of these things are cultural behavior. And we want to understand these cultural behaviors in order to be able to be more effective in organizational studies. Cultural anthropology has had a huge influence on organizational studies, particularly in thinking about the concept of organizational cultures and also how organizations interact with cultures. And notice that I'm using the plural, cultures, because we want to think of these cultures as different to a particular point in time and space. We're not part of a generic culture. We're part of specific family, local, national, and global traditions in a particular point in time. And we want to understand the kind of cultural work that gets done in organizations, particularly in nonprofit and governmental organizations, but also, of course, in for-profit organizations. Places like Google have a particular kind of cultural work to get people to be excited about information, excited about computing, excited about the kinds of products that they make, that they engage in. And I want you to understand the cultural work that organizations do. We'll be working with a very specific organization this semester, Japantown Prepared. And we want to be thinking not only about the cultures of Japantown, but the organizational culture of Japantown Prepared. And we want to understand that better in order to be more effective in doing the kind of work Japantown Prepared does, to prepare the people of Japantown for emergency situations and to help them recover from those emergency situations and disasters when they occur. So to cap off this little mini lecture in the anthropological imagination, I want you to imagine life in Japantown. Imagine it before the pandemic, when there were still events such as the one you see in front of you, a matsuri, a festival taking place in front of the Buddhist temple, where San Jose Taiko is in the street and people are eating regional sushi and dancing in the street and having a great time. Everything from that to the everyday life of people going to Roy's Station and buying a coffee and visiting with their friends. And how that life has changed during the pandemic. What kinds of things have gone inside homes or virtual that were once on the streets? How does that change the cultural life of Japantown? Japantown was rich in a variety of restaurants, mostly Japanese, but certainly a variety of Asian restaurants. Restaurants have been hard hit by the pandemic. What has happened to the cultural life now that those places have either shut down or gone to all takeout? So these are things I want you to be thinking of as you take the tour, Japantown Prepared tour, in virtual reality, 360-degree photography on the Google tour that has been prepared for you.